Motion 71. The member for Summerside South Drive moves, seconded by the Leader of the Opposition, the following motion. Whereas democracy is a fundamental part of Canadian society, and whereas the first-past-the-post electoral system produces seat counts that are often disproportionate to the popular support of political parties, and whereas all politicians and all parties are widely perceived by the public and by each other to have a vested interest in the design of the electoral system, and whereas its government's first speech from the throne stated that government would convene a panel made up of citizens and elected members to consider reforms to this legislature, and whereas there is a strong appetite for electoral reform on Prince Edward Island, as evidenced by the 2016 electoral reform plebiscite and the 2019 referendum. Therefore be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to convene a Citizens' Assembly to deliberate on a model for proportional representation. Therefore be it further resolved that this Citizens' Assembly be formed of at least 27 willing, randomly selected citizens who are broadly representative of island society as reflected in the census, including age, gender, social class, and regional spread. And therefore be it further resolved that the mandate of the Citizens' Assembly include proposing, in a report to the Legislative Assembly, a specific, detailed design for an electoral system that is tailored to PEI's needs, and which it believes would meet the approval of a majority of the island public.
The honourable member from Summerside South Drive to start debate.
Mr. Speaker, may I have the podium, please? Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to move this motion, which, at its core, is about improving our democracy. Democracy is what brings us here together. It guarantees islanders a direct say in who represents them. Our democracy is not something we can take for granted. It's something we must always be evaluating to ensure it's working for islanders. 5 years ago, we had a plebiscite on democratic renewal. The unofficial question being asked, according to the Chief Electoral Officer's report on the plebiscite, was, is it time for change? The answer the people gave was a yes. There were 5 options on the table, including the status quo. And as such, we used a ranked ballot to distill it down to one choice. That choice was a form of proportional representation. In response, the Premier of the day made an executive decision not to honour the vote, substituting his views for those of islanders. His entire caucus stood as a bloc to vote against the expressed will of the people. It was at this moment that I personally had had enough, and it was the primary factor contributing to me being here in this legislature today. I replaced a minister who had voted against the people. The reason it hits so dear to my heart is that I have children who need legislators who can build consensus on a path forward, move towards it, and keep moving forward. The major issues of our time, like climate change, need a sustained and shared effort from our elected officials. We don't get that from the partisan politics that first past the post fuels. We get lurching in opposite directions as we go from election to election, voting out the party that took us in one direction for the party that promised us to head in the other direction. It does not provide a stable foundation for progress. These lurches are fed by the system of first past the post, such that a small sway in the vote can produce vastly exaggerated results. That is bad enough when there are 2 parties. Now that there are 3 well-established parties on PEI, the results can offer even further skewed results. Majorities are more common in first past the post, yeah, but these are not majorities that have the support of the majority of the voters. It's not unusual, in fact, it's quite common on PEI to see 100% of the power to pass laws handed over to a party that is far from majority support. With 3 parties in 27 districts, it is possible that a majority government is handed to a party that only gets 34% of the vote in 14 districts. That means today that a party needs less than 18% of the total eligible votes to secure a majority. 18%. With proportional representation, that amount is always more than 50% of the votes. If we want to safeguard our democracy, we need to consider proportional representation. A proportional system would deliver seat counts that more closely reflect popular support. It means more minority governments, but that means more collaborative governance. In the early days of this legislative assembly, we heard loud and clear from Islanders that the collaboration that flows from minority governments is exactly the kind of spirit they want to see in their House. It's a credit to every member of this House that we were the envy of the country with our collaborative legislature working for the best interests of the people rather than the best interests of the party. Not only does proportional representation mean more proportional sharing of power in this chamber, it also means greater representation of women and underrepresented groups in the legislature. This has been the experience of the many international jurisdictions who rely on proportional systems. We've had important debates in this House about the need to apply different lenses, a racial lens, a child rights impact lens, and so forth. It's not enough for government to undertake this work. We also need a legislature that brings these perspectives to the table. If changes to our electoral system would provide us with a truer reflection of our population, we should make these changes, period. It's my belief that Islanders feel better about their democracy when they're able to vote for the party that best reflects their values, rather than having to vote against the party that they feel they need to defeat. Ever since I started voting, I have, for the most part, felt motivated by fear instead of hope. And I know it's a feeling shared by many Islanders. That needs to change. The referendum we had was inconclusive in its results. Neither the yes side nor the no side won. I feel this is very indicative of the flawed manner in which it was designed. Ironically, if we used the first past the post system to decide the outcome, then proportional representation would have won. And if we used proportional representation system to decide the outcome, first past the post would have won. We didn't use either. We had thresholds and rules set to make change more difficult. Because if no one wins, the system would not change. We had restrictive rules that required advocates on both sides of the question to register and chilled the expression of Islanders who were unsure what they could and couldn't say. The political motivations of the government of the day were clear. The interests of the party were put before the interests of the people. Another flaw in the process has been that there's been no definitive proportional option to debate. There have always been unanswered questions, which leave voters with those questions leaning towards not voting for change. I truly believe that once Islanders have a clear choice in front of them, with all of the answers to all of the questions laid out in a form of proportional representation, that we will get a truer, fairer vote on democratic reform here on PEI, one that we can all honor. All that context was needed to frame the reason that a citizens' assembly is essential to finding a path forward. We need, as even the fated former premier said, a clear question. That's impossible until we have a well-defined proportional system to consider. This motion seeks to strike a citizens' assembly to do just that. A citizens' assembly is an independent, nonpartisan assembly of citizens that is convened to deliberate on complex issues of significant importance to society. As we propose in our motion, and as is normally the case, a citizens' assembly is broadly demographically representative of society. Citizens' assemblies have been used in British Columbia and Ontario to study the question of electoral reform, and have also been used in other countries like the Netherlands and Ireland to debate other issues of significance. Why do I think a citizens' assembly is appropriate for PEI? First, it has an advantage as a non-partisan body. Whether or not it's true, politicians of all political stripes are, and probably always will be, viewed as acting in their own self-interest when it comes to electoral reform. It undermines discussions about electoral reform before they even begin. Members of a citizens' assembly are not burdened with these political concerns, which leads me to my second point. Citizens' assemblies are empowered to examine the evidence thoughtfully, deliberately, and put forward what they believe is the best public policy for Islanders. They are not limited by a lack of information or one-sided advertising that one might see during an election cycle. Even the crafters of the flawed referendum were determined to keep politics out of the process, so they said. No politician was permitted to speak to the referendum during the active period of the referendum. While I personally feel this was more intended to prevent education on the proportional system, as I mentioned, it is in the interest of the status quo to leave questions unanswered. It nonetheless is another reason I hope to see all members of this House vote to take politics out of it and to get Islanders to the table in development of a specific system of proportional representation, one that we can debate here fulsomely after the work of the Citizens' Assembly is completed. The government's first throne speech noted Islanders' desire to approach our democracy with an open and judicious mind. That's a quote, desire to approach our democracy with an open and judicious mind. It also made this important observation. Another quote, while respectful of the traditions of this institution, government also understands that a rigid adherence to the past is no emblem of strength. To maintain public trust, we must evolve in a respectful and responsible manner. We have the power, end quote, we have the power and duty to strengthen, improve, and evolve our democracy in a way that better reflects the identities and views of Islanders. I encourage all members of this House to support this motion so we can move towards a more reflective democracy on Prince Edward Island. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Summerside South Drive for opening debate on this and being the mover of what I consider to be an extraordinarily important motion here in this House. I spoke earlier today in my member statement about what my motivations were for getting involved in politics, and I definitely would not want to presume or guess at anybody else's aspirations and what was their inspiration to get involved here. But my experience in talking to elected representatives from all parties who are represented in our system, both provincially and federally and elsewhere, and some parties that have yet to be represented and have elected members, is that it is the desire to improve the lives of the citizens and the people they serve in their communities. That is the foundation, or at least it's in there somewhere, in what motivated people to get involved in politics. And I heard from Summerside South Drive just a couple of minutes ago that indeed proportional representation was the thing that was the final straw, I think he put it, but maybe more positively the catalyst that caused him to put his name forward in the election 2019, excuse me. And I want to talk about that election just a little bit, because lost in all of the clamor and the emotion, of course, towards the end of that campaign was the fact that we had a plebiscite attached to that vote in 2019. And I'm on record on the night of that election. Of course, I was deeply disappointed that my party did not form government, although we made an historic breakthrough here in terms of green politics in Canada. But I was very disappointed we did not form government, but I was more disappointed in the fact that the plebiscite on proportional representation failed by a mere 2%. I was more disappointed because I know that the success of that plebiscite would have led to permanent. It should, of course, the vote in 2016, as my honourable colleague has just mentioned, should have led to that anyway, because it was a clear winner in the plebiscite we had then. But here was an opportunity to underline the decision that Islanders made, and sadly we did not do that. And it has left us with an antiquated system which has been abandoned by so many democracies around this world, and I'll come back to that later. We who sit in here as elected members are blessed. We get to help people every day. That's an enormously important part of our job. And there are many aspects to being an MLA. Of course, we all do constituency work, and there lies a very personal and intimate connection that we have with all of our constituents, which provide us with opportunities to help them navigate through life, sometimes through government systems, sometimes accessing essential services. And there's a tremendous satisfaction that comes from being able to help people. In my previous life, I helped people in a very different way, but that was the core satisfaction in the job that I did. And again, each of us here has opportunities every day to help our friends and neighbours, and that is a great privilege that we have as elected members. We also do legislative work. And to me, that is the core of what we are elected to do. There are only 27 islanders at any one time who have the opportunity and the ability to craft the laws of this country, of this province, excuse me. Again, an enormous privilege. And I would love to work within a system that allows us to do the best legislative work that we possibly can. Legislative work, of course, happens within the framework of whatever system you live and work within. Here we work in a first-past-the-post system, a system we inherited from Westminster, from our British colonial past. And as I said a few minutes ago, many other countries who also inherited this system recognized somewhere along the way that it was not serving their democracy well. And they abandoned it for something different, something better. I would love to be able to carry out the legislative work that we do here in this House in a better framework, in a better system that provides the opportunities for cooperation, for collaboration, for shared ideas, rather than a system which encourages hyperpartisanship, which leads to snap elections when there is an opportunity for the government in power to take advantage of a system which exaggerates small changes in popular support, and which provides us with the stability of a system, as my honourable friend mentioned in his remarks, which does not lurch from one extreme to another as parties of different philosophies and values undo the good work that was done by their predecessors. We're lucky because Prince Edward Island itself is a friendly, intimate place, a place where people take care of each other. And when the late Stuart McLean was here, I'll never forget the comments he made in Georgetown when he was doing his Vinyl Cafe show there. And of course, he always endeavored to take a sense, get the pulse of the place in which he was speaking. And he asked about, well, it was a rhetorical question, and he asked what it is that keeps this island going. And he said it's fundraisers, it's community events that we're there to support our friends and neighbours. He was really struck by what an important part of our culture that is. So PEI is just naturally a more collaborative, collegial place than I think many others. And that's part of our history, it's part of our tradition, it's part of who we are. And it's a lovely part of who we are. And I think that cultural tendency lends itself to cooperative politics. And again, as my honourable friend said in his remarks, islanders, while they may disagree with the policies that your particular party subscribes to, almost to a person, people will come up to me and say, you know what, I'm so happy that the politics that we have here on Prince Edward Island is friendly. They like the fact that we like to work together. And that's something very unusual and precious. And that's not to say that we don't get at each other sometimes. Of course we do. That's part of our job too. But I think we do it with a civility which is rare in politics. And that sort of thing can happen, or it can be encouraged, it can be incubated in a system that encourages collaboration and does not reward competitive hyperpartisanship to spring an election at a time when your popularity may have gone up a couple of points and allowed you, as my honourable friend said, to form a majority government with far short of majority support in the population. There are so many things wrong with the current system that we have. It produces false majorities. It produces underrepresentation. It produces that lurching effect that I and my honourable colleague have talked about. And we just have to look. I mean, any election almost in the history of Canadian politics under this system will provide you with examples of the shortcomings of first past the post. Let's just look at the most recent federal election. Did the party that won the most votes form government? One would imagine that that would be a fundamental part of democracy, that the most popular party would end up in government. No, it did not. A party that got considerably less votes ended up forming government, albeit a minority government. But you know what? Had it been just a couple of percentage points higher, either one of those parties could have formed a majority government and yet not had the most votes. I find it hard to defend a system that is that dysfunctional. I mean, that's just one example from the most recent federal election that we have had. We have overrepresentation from some parties because they have regional strength and therefore they can elect members because they are operating not across the whole country. We have underrepresentation of some other parties who may have run a national campaign, may have received a significant percentage of the vote and yet are not represented in Parliament. And I'm not suggesting that every party that ran in that election, that I support the ideas that they come forward with and the policies that they promote. But they absolutely have a right to be represented in Parliament if Canadians support them in sufficient numbers. And we have a system that does not allow that. Of course, there was a promise to change federally back in 2015. Our Prime Minister stated very clearly in the run-up to the election when he became Prime Minister, of course, they were third party at the time, that this would be, if they were to be elected to government, this would be the last election in Canada held under first past the post federally. A tremendous disappointment. And I know that in that election, a large number of Canadians were drawn to the Liberal Party specifically because of that promise. Because they are not satisfied with the system that we have, and they wanted to see something better. And there was deep disappointment when our federal government did not uphold that promise. Now, one of the reasons, of course, that governments, and they are not the first government to have promised to get rid of first past the post and bring in something more democratic and more representative of the will of the people. But one of the reasons that governments are disinclined to do that when they finally get power is they have been rewarded by a system that allows them, even though they received far less in almost every instance than 50% of the vote, to have 100% of the power. And making the assumption, as many people do, that self-interest is the primary, if not the sole motivator for politicians and political parties, they assume that why would a party ever change a system that has granted them this disproportionate amount of power? The problem with that motivation is, what if you're just in politics because you want a better system? What if you're in politics because you want better governance? What if you're in politics because you want to do better work? What if you're in politics because you want a legislature that more accurately reflects the will of the people? What if you are in politics because you want better representation of all aspects of our community, from all corners of our community? Younger people, women, minority groups. Every country in the world that has proportional representation, you will see far greater representation from minority groups in their parliaments. So my strong, as you can hear, endorsement of proportional representation is not because it's going to do the Green Party any good. We have proven that we can work in a first-past-the-post system and compete and form an opposition. It is because it provides better governance. It provides opportunities for legislators to do their job to the best of their abilities. I want to talk a little bit about citizens' assemblies, and of course they've been used in Canada before. Both Ontario and British Columbia have brought forward citizens' assemblies specifically to talk about electoral reform. And they've been used in other countries as well, the Netherlands, Ireland, and no doubt others, where the opportunity for citizens to be directly involved in shaping decisions and gathering information and doing consultation without the distorting lens of politics and partisanship that often pollutes truly effective decision-making, those citizens' assemblies have come back and done extraordinarily good work. And our motion talks about how a citizens' assembly would be chosen, and as was the case in Ontario and British Columbia, they were randomly selected individuals from each district or each riding in that jurisdiction. In BC, it was 79, I believe. In Ontario, it was 103. And they did the work that we do as elected officials without having to wear a political or partisan hat as they did it. And the results are extraordinary. In both cases, the citizens' assemblies in Ontario and British Columbia came back with recommendations on what electoral reform should look like. They came back with different recommendations, and I love that. In Ontario, they came back with mixed member proportional, which is exactly what Islanders voted for in 2016. In British Columbia, it was a single transferable vote system. Again, a proportional system, but a different kind of proportional system that this Citizens' Assembly felt was more suited to the unique needs of British Columbia. Now, in British Columbia, the vote that followed, and that was back in 2005, I believe, almost 60% of British Columbians voted in favor of the recommendation that came forward from that Citizens' Assembly. But they had set such a high bar for this to pass. 60% was the required amount of support for the recommendation from the Citizens' Assembly, that it too failed by a mere couple of percentage points, almost exactly as close as it was here on Prince Edward Island. In Ontario, they came forward again with a mixed member proportional system, and there the citizens of Ontario did not vote in favor of that. And hey, that's democracy. Those are ideas brought forward by citizens to their fellow citizens, and sometimes those ideas are embraced, sometimes they are not. Ireland, perhaps, is the home of the greatest use and utility and success of citizens' assemblies, and their citizens' assembly, the translation, I'm not going to attempt to say the Gaelic version, is we the citizens is who they are, and they have brought forward recommendations to their parliament on things such as fixed term elections and parliaments, abortion, which of course in any jurisdiction, but particularly in Ireland, was a hot button topic, the constitution of the country itself, and many other issues. Now, in Ireland, of course, just a few years ago, they passed a law allowing abortion in a country where that would have been perhaps unthinkable had that gone through the political process of the parliament. But because the Citizens' Assembly got involved, there was a strength, there was a vitality, there was an ability for the ideas that were brought forward by what was considered to be an independent and non-partisan Citizens' Assembly that allowed that very difficult decision to be made. The party I represent here in this House is founded on a number of principles and values, and grassroots participatory democracy is one of those. And a Citizens' Assembly is exactly that. It empowers citizens, it reflects the essence of democracy, which is always messy, and we see that ourselves every day in this House, but it's also beautiful, and it could be powerful, extraordinarily powerful. And when it's practiced by citizens who are there because they wish to contribute to the decision-making process and democracy without any attachment to a political party, I think it's a wonderful opportunity. And of course, as Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government, except all of those others that have been tried from time to time. A nod to the fact that democracy is messy. But you know what? It's the best we've got. And citizens' assemblies reflect the best of the best. I look forward to hearing what others will say on this motion. We haven't talked about proportional representation really at all in this House since the election. And I'd be interested to see what other members think of this. We could still be pioneers. And we can show that those results from 2016 were indeed the will of islanders, and they can be acted upon. And as we often say in here, we can do better and we should do better. And here is an opportunity for us to do just that. And I look forward to others speaking to this motion, and I ask for every member in this House's support for this important motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any other members wishing to speak to the motion? No? If not, I'll go back to the mover of the motion, the honourable member from Summerside South Drive, to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wonderful words from the Leader of the Opposition there. I am very surprised to see that no one else in this House wants to speak to a motion that would strengthen our democracy, but I guess we'll have to wait and see how the vote goes. Perhaps everybody's already made up their mind that they're going to vote for this, Mr. Speaker. So with that, I close debate. Call the question.
Honourable members, it was asked for a standing vote. Sergeant at Arms, you may ring the bell.
Third part is ready for the bill.
Okay, honourable members, those voting against the motion, please stand.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown Winslow, the Honourable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, the Honourable Minister for Fisheries and Communities, the Honourable Minister of Finance, the Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, the Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action, the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land and the Minister of Justice and Public Safety, the Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, and the Honourable the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness. The Honourable Member from Montague Kilmuir, and the Honourable Member from O'Leary Inverness.
Honourable members, those voting for the motion, please stand.
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing, and the Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning. The Honourable Member from Charlottetown West Royalty, the Honourable Leader of the Third Party, the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, the Honourable Member from Summerside Wilmot, the Honourable Member from Morel Donut, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere, the Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Victoria Park, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Brighton, the Honourable Member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke, and the Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
I had it right. Honourable member, your motion's passed. I did have the right count. I was just checking my figures.